Well, good morning, everybody, and a very warm welcome on a cold day to Cambridge, to the Axon Johnson Centre for the Study of Classical Architecture. I'm Frank Sellon, I'm the director of the centre. It's a great pleasure to see so many of you in the room here, the Maitland room here at Downing College. I think the second time we've been in the Maitland room. The first time was a speaker from Oxford, so it's kind of appropriate that we have Simon today as well. Warm welcome to any of you joining online. You're very welcome as people are in the room. As we've said in the past, if you'd like to ask any questions at the end of the seminar today, please type them to the chat function, and we'll do our best to take them at the end of the talk. So it's a great pleasure to introduce long-standing colleague and friend, Dr. Simon Bradley, to speak to us today. Often when I'm introducing speakers, you tend to start by talking about what they know about. In Simon's case, it's the opposite. Really, you have to start talking about what he doesn't know about, because as the editor of the Pevsner Buildings of England series for 30 years, boy and man, Simon, boy and man, and as the author of the two great volumes on the City of London, the City of Westminster, and then 2014 on the Cambridgeshire volume, and now last year on the Oxford and Southeast Oxford volumes. Simon is one of the foremost authorities on the architectural history of this country across the whole chronological period, from the Middle Ages to the present day. He has a side interest as well, which is that he's also a railway enthusiast, or should I say railway architecture?
So you can say that,
railway enthusiast, is okay. Which I rather share that interest actually. I loved his book on St Pancras Station. He wrote the profile book series 10 or more years ago now. And Simon's most recent book, in fact, Bradley's Railway Guide, yes. Is just out in the last couple of weeks. That's his third book on railways, and there's one more to come, at least one more.
Yeah, on top, yes.
A biography of Waterloo Station is going to be on the way soon. So Simon, today you're not talking about railway architecture, I think, unless you talk about Oxford Station, which I doubt you will. But you are talking to us on the back of your recent research and publication of the Oxford volume,
yes,
about Oxford classicism in the Buildings of England. So we're delighted to have you here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. So yes, Pevsner. Well, you surely all know the outlines, but I'll go through the outlines in case you don't know. Nicholas Pevsner, distinguished architectural and art historian, refugee from Hitler's Germany, came to this country in the 30s. A man of many sides, a man with a strong Cambridge connection, apart from many other things, but best remembered now for his series, The Buildings of England, a county by county guide to just that, most of which he wrote himself. So there you see him towards the end of the project on the cover of Susie Harris's splendid biography, which can be recommended if you want to know more about him and his life and his world. It was important that Pevsner saw the buildings and other contents of the book himself as far as possible. So hence a rather grueling cycle of visits around the English counties. There we see him in Dorset in about 1970, so towards the end of the project. And you will also see some notes. These are representative notes from, not quite sure where, but his notes on, it was obviously quite a rewarding church. Starts to do little sketch plans of individual features. So he would then write up, usually, the contents of each day's visiting at the end of that day in the evening, and so that it would come together in a rather demanding way. And that's not the whole story, because the books have been revised and expanded since. That process began in earnest in 1983 and has just concluded with the Staffordshire volume. There I show you the original 1974 Staffordshire volume cover, and there are the two editors of the series, myself and Charles O'Brien, with the completed piles of the revised series. And there in front of us is the photo of Pevsner with his almost completed piles from half a century or so before. So the revised editions, well, it's not simply a question of revision or even a question of revising and updating. They are a larger format, considerably larger, and they allow us to say more. They, if you like, move to some extent away from the guidebook format, if only in terms of the physical weight that you have to carry around. but they are still very much written with a view to your encounter with buildings and to steer you around buildings in places. So we continue to recommend them as guidebooks and to urge people to take them out into the field and use them with the buildings that they describe. So we can expand, but also enhance, and that's perhaps a broader term. But as we go through, I'll be coming back now and again to what Pevsner said about buildings in his Oxfordshire volume and what now one would want to say and what I have said in the revised series, because with the larger format and more space, you can add more of the things you might have put in, had you had the time, had you had the space, talking more about patronage, talking more about use and function, talking more about iconography, and a great, the whole field. So Cambridgeshire, I'll also draw the parallel now and again with the Oxfordshire volume, and it was a rather wonderful thing to have gone from doing Cambridge to doing Oxford. So there you see the original 1954 Pevsner volume. He did Cambridge fairly early on. He was Slade Professor at Cambridge from the 40s into the 50s when it was still a flexible duration post. And he was a fellow of St John's, so he knew Cambridge very well. When that was sold out, very large original printings, he then chose to do the revised edition himself, 1970 in the middle. That was the only non-London volume where he actually came back to revise his own work. By then, most books were being put up to the next generation of Pevsner editors. So that shows his own strong connection with Cambridgeshire, I think, with Cambridge in particular. And then there is the, as you see, rather larger revision from 2014. And a similar process with Oxford. That's the 1974, almost the last volume in the series. It was published on the same day as the nominal last volume, Staffordshire. But it was written somewhat before that and held up for various reasons. Pevsner just did the Oxford section of that one. And then we've split the county in two. The original edition was very fat, nearly 1,000 pages. So there's the revised edition of the part with Oxford with a classical building on the front, as you see. So to classicism and to start with a comparison between Cambridge and Oxford, the Gate of Honour you will all know, I'm sure. The rather overlooked sort of semi-parallel over at Oxford. This is Jesus College. It was a new foundation. This is it in an early 17th century engraving, and largely Gothic, largely sort of late collegiate Gothic. But just here, around the doorway, rather tentatively and not fully thought through, there is a classical framing to that Gothic arch with two classical columns in the entablature. This is not very well recorded. It was swept away in the mid-19th century, and when that whole frontage was refaced and sort of enhanced and made more orthodox, sort of Tudor or Tudor collegiate. But it shows, if you want to, it's impossible not to fall into the habit now and again of thinking of this as a sort of competition or a race or whatever it may be. But I'll try and avoid that. As a sort of ruling principle, but clearly word of classicism had reached Oxford, and it was someone was struggling to integrate it. Let's say Cambridge. Here we have a freestanding, or at least a fully realised classical building. So Cambridge at that point would appear to be absolutely ahead of the game. But that is not how things continue. So, for the first fully realised episodes of classical architecture in Oxford, you have to jump forward to the next generation or so. So this is around 1610, and this is the first to be completed, though it all comes quite close together. So this is the Fellows Quad at Merton. And although we were only seeing part of it, you get the drift. You've got Tudor collegiate, post-Gothic, Gothic with its non-round arch windows. What turns out to be a post-medieval device of a running hood mould, for want of a better term, which appears to have originated actually not in Oxford, but somewhere in Yorkshire. At least the earliest date of the examples seem to be up there. This was the one thing on which I had a very detailed exchange with Mark Giroux about, because no one seemed to have picked up on it before. But the first examples appear in Oxford around 1600 or so, under the aegis of Merton. Complicated story, but there's a lesser academic hall next to Merton, which was rather under their wing. And there are some classical features there, but also these running good roads. But they become absolutely a normal Oxford thing running right into the 18th century. They become part of the local vocabulary. But on top of that, the great frontispiece, the Tower of the Orders, we call it, except it's not really a tower, but the enhancement to the major axis of that quad, with the 4 orders selected in their correct Serlian order from the plainest to topmost, so I think finishing with composite. Somewhat crude, of course, by orthodox standards in terms of their execution and their proportions too, but nonetheless a parade of classical learning as well as of what we might call Elizabethan Jacobean ornament, not from clearly ancient classical sources. It's, the sense also that it's being a bit hybridized. You've got Gothic niches here, and you've got a pointed arched doorway there. So it is not fully realized classicism in that sense, and that's an important point too. The patronage here, well, Henry Saville, who was the head of the college at that time, who was a Yorkshireman with continuing strong Yorkshire connections, and he brought down 2 Yorkshire masons to do the job, Ackroyd and Bentley. Ackroyd had been working for his brother up in Yorkshire not long before. It's not sort of generated from Oxford, if you like, from the Oxford building world. It's imported, but not as you might expect from London or the South East. It's imported from Yorkshire, where kind of vernacular classicism or local strain of classicism has been developing. And in terms of parallels to this frontage, then, well, the Stonyhurst in Lancashire, so within range of Yorkshire, has something of similar. But the earliest English examples go back to the mid-16th century, and the earliest one of all is Somerset House, the Strand frontage of Somerset House. So you begin to see what a rather complicated picture it is, and how much there is to try and sum up within the confines of the Pevsner volume. But I had to go because this is such an important moment and such an important building. And at the same time, well, they're part of the same axis, if you like. The Bodleian Library has taken shape. This is with the same masons. Actually, we couldn't just have been one. They had a big team. They brought down other masons down from Yorkshire too. Now, the patron, Sir Thomas Bodley of the library, was hand in glove with Saville and Merton. They were great friends and close associates. And so there's no reason to look further for an explanation of why the same masons were used. So looking at the building now, here we have a more correct, you might say, in terms of proportions. The columns are less sort of pole-like, if you like, and also a richer and fuller realization of the orders. You've got fully 5, you have got Tuscan as well as you mustn't think about the entablatures too much, because getting the entablatures right wasn't part of the story then. It's all about the columns. And they do have some Elizabethan Jacobean type embellishments that whatever decoration is there in the shafts, but nonetheless Tuscan work with the composite. And in a hugely important building, I mean, not just in Oxford or even national terms, but international terms. This is one of the grandest libraries, an enhancement of an existing medieval library, but nonetheless greatly multiplying the amount of space. And it also doubled as the schools, the lecture rooms of Oxford. So the library space was running on the top. The schools, the lecture rooms were in the lower 2 stories for all the different faculties. So it is a great corporate expression of what the university was for, what learning stood for. But at the same time, the classicism is negotiating a sort of place within an existing Gothic tradition. Here we see pinnacles used not in the medieval way on the top of buttresses, but stuck as ornaments on top of parapet, it's the backing of the parapet, and the windows still have cusping to the window heads. They knew what they were doing, and this is the thing. There is a tendency in Pevsner's writing, and a lot of other writing, to say, well, they're a bit, stuck in the mud, aren't they? Or, they're still shackled by their traditions, or dons. They never kind of look beyond the boundaries of the city. But no, this is a clear and proud and sophisticated attempt to reconcile and to merge and to find a sort of fusion or hybridity, which would express the traditions of the university, and the colleges, which go intensely proud and drew their authority from their medieval past. In terms of, I couldn't resist this one. I should explain most of the photos. Any nice photos you see are from the new Pevsner volume taken by James Davis. If you see a poor quality one, it's one of mine. But it was a good way of selecting, to think what were the buildings I had previously selected as the most worth showing with a photograph. When Bodleian died, before his library was finished, in fact, this is some years after his death. He gets a monument by Nicholas Stone in Merton Chapel, so there's that connection with Merton and the Sabbath coming back here. And this rather lovely detail of the columns made of books with their foredges showing, and also the clasps that would be used to, sometimes books at that period would have clasps as part of the binding. So there we have a kind of Mannerist book derived Tuscan order. Several of these are on Oxford, actually, this use of books on monuments, and even one architectural one mentioned on the library at Teddy Hall, it's a door place. Generally, it's a different register, you could be more playful when you're dealing with monuments than you would choose to be a sort of public face of architecture. But then move to the 1630s, and showing on my screen what was on the oh, it's gone too far. There we are. No, is there a type there? Is that? That there, but not there.
Oh, yeah, let's see.
Perhaps I should use the keypad, should I?
Right.
There we are. So Nicholas Stone, again, coming back, Stone was both a sculptor and mason, and also a building contractor, and effectively an architect or designer of buildings. So here we have what is Oxford's first self-contained, fully classical, freestanding building from the early 1630s, paid for by an earl, commemorated in the inscription. And the gateway to the Botanic Gardens, then newly established. This is, I would argue, an extremely sophisticated building of a very high quality. And so one begins to look for sources or parallels elsewhere. There is a contemporary record, or at least a next generation down, saying that Stone didn't just build it, he also designed it. There's an intriguing note by Inigo Jones, who says that it was actually designed by some Oxford mathematicians, and then he adds in a rather snarky way, lamely. So Jones must have seen this and known it and thought, oh, well, however, it does come close to some of Jones's own designs in terms of, especially the sort of master designs, the more playful, more mannerist, if you like. So that could just have been Jones sort of kind of rubbishing the competition in a way. And I think more crucially in terms of its likely authorship, as Adam White has noted, Nicholas Stone was a well-connected man. He married the daughter of Hendrik de Keyser, who was one of the leading architects there in the Netherlands. And not very long before, a couple of years or something, Amsterdam had acquired a new gateway, the Haarlemmer Poort, designed by Hendrik de Keyser, which provides so many sources for this building in detail, and also two other little gateways that were built at the same time. So there doesn't seem to be any reason to look either to Oxford mathematicians, whoever they were, or certainly to Inigo Jones. And in fact, we could say this is not just built into a stone, but it was certainly designed by him too. But this is a sort of special occasion, kind of the triumphal arch, you know, the sort of equivalent of the temporary things being put up for progresses and festivals and the like. And when it comes to build for the colleges with their own traditions, so this is a new venture, the Botanic Garden that has no prior history, then Gothic comes back into play in the same decades. So two examples, Oriel, which is a medieval college which is rebuilding itself. You see here, it's moved on from the kind of combinations that we got at Merton and at Bodleian in the 1610s. Here we have the new device, shaped gable, fashionable device. Generally in the wider world, it appears on a large scale, you know, think of country houses and the like. In Oxford, it tends to occur in a sort of miniature form, rather attractive in a way. So there are other examples. But also still a great display of Gothic tracery for the hall and the chapel. But also a more up-to-date, if you like, certainly sort of post-Elizabethan classical features as the quite semicircular, so anyway, rounded pediment at the top. So again, finding a new sort of combination and new forms of hybridity. And things move at different speeds. Gothic joinery really doesn't last all that long, but Gothic vaulting and Gothic exterior features do. So here's the Convocation House, which is part of a later expansion of the Bodleian, so adding on at the other end. This is where the university would meet for elective debates and the like. And perhaps you can't see it that well, but the rather beautiful and very high quality joinery with edicules at the back, broken pediments and a sort of perspective effect, and then pilasters between. So this is, you know, really quite lavish. The vaulting, well, this is an 18th century renewal of the plaster vaults, and that was a new technique, really, plaster vaulting in the 1630s, which was failing. But it is so similar to many other vaults in Oxford around that time that it's very probably a direct reproduction of it in stone. So no, there were skilled masons in Oxford in the 1750s who knew how to do Gothic vaulting in stone. In Cambridge, the last examples are from the 1630s. So this Gothic collegiate tradition in building is a lot longer in Oxford, really quite striking. So during its time, like, then jump forward to the Restoration, and Wren comes along early in his career. This is Wren's first building in Oxford, slightly later than his chapel at Pembroke in Cambridge, and a more complex and, if you like, original building than that chapel, which is fairly straightforward, a very achieved building. It's an opening bid, if you like. The Sheldonian Theatre was and is the place where academic ceremonies are held. So it's a kind of great corporate expression of Oxford and what the university was for and how it wished to present itself. But it is now entirely purged of the Gothic reminiscences and features, which you see. This is the Bodleian in the schools. That's the medieval part. That's the 17th century part, the 1610s. But no attempt to reference it or do anything other than sit in a formal relationship with it. The design is like some long, complicated story. There are several variants, prior versions. Had there been more funds, this would have been a semicircle rather than a sort of canted treatment. The show front faces the this side, you don't see it there. And there have been other changes done with the cupolas or replacement. There used to be oval windows here, going all the way around. But nonetheless, you can most of what we see reflects Wren's original design. The sources for it, well, here we're entering the rich terrain of Wren's mind and Wren's inspiration and Wren's knowledge. But the classical theatre is one. The Basilica of Maxentius is another. And Vaux Vicomte, so recent French architecture, in other words, for this treatment of the arches. Whether it's an aesthetic success or not is another story. I mean, it's not generally been admired as a design. It has no progeny, really. I mean, John Summerson said, well, you're sort of expecting, look, this is sort of like an attic and sort of like a basement story, but where's the order gone? And he said it was like a man wearing his trousers pulled up to his chin and his hat pulled down to his eyes, or something like that. Well, vivid imagination there, but certainly it's a curious one-off. In terms of how it worked, however, in terms of its internal display with its painted ceiling, but everybody seems to be delighted with it. And then jump forward. Wren sort of fades out somewhat from Oxford and comes back to do a neo-Gothic building at Christchurch, but that's something of a one-off. But he's within hailing range, and he is sometimes consulted about things. But in Cambridge, it's a different story. Of course, he has Trinity Library, and truly one of his greatest works and one of the great buildings. So that library was complete by the time Queen's College, another one of the medieval colleges, built a new library for itself. Here we have what is a sure and mature classical building, with the mystery that we don't really know who definitely designed it. The name of the mason, well, that's an Oxford mason from a long-lived dynasty called the Townsends. And there is a complicated but enduring culture of consultation and of circulation, by which I mean that drawings and even engravings made for the purpose to raise funds would be sent around, rarely identified as to the designer, and people would discuss. So Wren was called in, for example, to make some adjustments to design for the chapel at Trinity College, and these appear to have been taken in. But the fact that he was being consulted indicates that he wasn't designing it. So that's another one of these sort of mysterious buildings for which no designer can be identified. In this case, the best candidate, and this comes not from looking at drawings or wrangling over the details of the treatment of classicism, but looking at the roof structure, as James Campbell noted some time ago, that there was quite distinctive roof structure here, which also appears in one of the church events, which was rebuilt, for which we have a stronger candidate for the designer, which is the man called Dean Aldrich, or Dean Henry Aldrich, the head of Christchurch, another sort of man of parts, a versatile figure with a strong scholarly interest in architecture. So we're coming back to Aldrich. So given that, as James says, innovations in that kind of design appear not to be happening within the building world at that point, they seem to require someone like Wren, I think, on our side, perhaps with an experience of or access to designs from elsewhere, from abroad. Then there is a good case for giving this to Henry Aldrich. Strange that nobody ever said as much, but then again, Aldrich's responsibility for that church, slightly later than this building, starts, the earliest record of it is in a guidebook of about 20 or 30 or so years later. But that seems a good source, it doesn't seem to be a reason for introducing false information about it at that point and in that context. And in terms of the relationship with the Trinity Library, well, it's been fiddled with a bit, but imagine these arches originally solid, but this treatment of the wall and with the statues within the wall, that is original, but it was open below, it's partly infilled and enclosed now. But you'll recognise the depth to Trinity with the great library space raised up over an open walkway, and there was a quad effectively that was taking shape on the far side there on the original quad. since rebuilt medieval project is on that side. And so Henry Aldrich again, Dean Aldrich, this is his work at his own college, Christchurch. Again, and in this instance, there's no sort of debate about who designed it. It's recorded. Aldrich, his interest in architecture extended to a close interest in Palladio. He was working on a never completed, never published treatise, effectively a sort of Vitruvian type treatise on classicism, but which referenced some designs by Palladio. And John Summerson said, well, haven't we got Palladianism here? This is Anglo-Palladian architecture, founded before Burlington. And clearly, in terms of the familiar Palladian formula, an order embracing a piano nobile and a floor above, and then the rusticated basement. And yes, we've got something very close to that. Summerson pointed out slightly amateurish treatment, slightly awkward angles, and these are a bit pedantic to do with elements and so on. So, but that's the level of sort of like Burlingtonian nitpicking. Probably actually is a very, very grand and sophisticated building for its date. The viewpoint, I should say here, is the library, which was the fourth side of the freestanding building. Aldrich made designs for this which weren't executed. And what was built there is the next generation down, a man called Dr. George Clark, a fellow of all souls, and who, in many respects, Aldrich's heir as Oxford's best, in what's the word, homegrown authority on architecture. Pevsner here, he didn't pick up the Palladian side of it, but he noted the Puritan side, slightly low. And there we see, yes, Dean Aldrich, and that was George Clark designing his monument, a sort of homage, if you like. And that is in Christchurch Cathedral. So by that time, however, by the time Clark was designing that, and by the time Clark was getting busy in the architectural world, we have one of the great names coming in and enriching, but also complicating the picture, Hawksmoor. Hawksmoor, the commission here, I should say, was for a building which would, for among other reasons or other purposes, for the university press. So this is a university commission, and you can see its relationship with the Sheldonian. So we're beginning to build up a great sequence of university buildings together with through the arch. You can see the arch of the schools part of the Bodleian. So their sense of formal town planning, which is a very important theme for Hawksmoor too. And you see well, we've been talking about correct or incorrect versions of all of this, but this is Hawksmoor varying or adapting with purpose, because these are canonically far too tall and slim for Doric. But that's not the point. The point is to use them expressively and to innovate. Also very characteristic of Hawksmoor's work in Oxford, at least, this kind of cutting away of the wall surface, you see the recessing, but then coming forward again with the windows surrounds, and these great keystones were used sparingly, and then just a clever touch of piercing Doric entablature with the windows. So, and this is a building in the round, it's got this is the only full portico. There's a portico relief on the other side, broken pediments on the ends, but it is fully achieved and splendid building. It's always been admired as a characteristic work of Hawksmoor. He didn't just kind of send it down from London, though. He was its design was part of, again, a collaborative process of discussion and consultation. And George Clark was involved in that. The mason was William Townsend, and Townsend is the most important of this family of masons in terms of what he can do and the level at which he's working. And it appears also his ability to originate or adapt and originate. Now, all of those three come back again as we move on to back to Queen's College. This is when it's starting to rebuild its original quad, following on from that library of the 1690s. Now, this is an extraordinarily complicated story because there are lots and lots of drawings. Very few of them actually match exactly what was built. A good many of them are by Hawksmoor, so Hawksmoor trying out various ideas. Hawksmoor extremely fertile architect in terms of ideas and proposals, and some of them unrealistic, let's say. Others have been really quite specifically intended for a particular purpose. The best summary seems to be that Hawksmoor was providing designs and that Clark and Townsend between them were adapting and adjusting them. But Hawksmoor coming back to him. So here we see the hall. Lovely thing, spreading space. There's a balcony which lets you look down into it from the back way up. So you're wondering about the viewpoint. But it is governed by an order that it has Doric pilasters with a triglyph at the top. So, again, there's no attempt to reach back to a medieval tradition, even for a college with a royal 14th century foundation. It's absolutely a clean start in terms of the architectural expression, which has to be significant in terms of what you might think of as the high point of Oxford classicism and its great age, really. And classicism also percolating into the building world in grander and more ambitious ways, this being a house by and for, rather the frontage, because the building was lower. One of the Oxford Masons, this isn't Townsend, this is a man who would have known well, Bartholomew Paisley, who also worked at Blenheim, as did Townsend some of the time. Lots of Masons needed for that huge project just up the road. So it's become known as Vanbrugh House because of that connection. But it's just as much Hawksmoorian, really, isn't it? I mean, there are those, what we've just seen, those sections of the tablet show this in, and there's sort of not quite the full layering of the wall, but certainly these blockish aprons to the windows, that's very much a Hawksmoor detail. Well, no one's ever thought to call it Hawksmoor House, but no one quite knew what Hawksmoor got up to. Everybody knew about Vanbrugh, and that's a subsequent name, not its original name. Hawksmoor again, All Souls, another medieval college, undergoing partial rebuilding, and perhaps no need to add very much more here, except just to show the scale of the achievement. It's took a long time to finish, but the treatment of superimposed borders for the Sheldonians goes back to Hawksmoor. However, in terms of the exterior, well, the library runs along one side of the getting the timeline again. There we are. The library runs along this side of the quad at right angles. But this is the side facing where the relative camera, shortly to appear, now stands. And it is in this extraordinary stripped down, but sort of also kind of supercharged neo-Gothic, very much Hawksmoor's own personal interpretation of the style. There are those pinnacles that sit here. Actually, they do have buttresses, rather slim ones, rather than just sitting on the parapet. And then these turrets, which are partly reminiscent of late medieval church spires, stone spires, partly look across to Hawksmoor's city churches, the 50 churches, sorry, not city, the 50 churches in London. If you think of some of those. This side remained unrebuilt, and was Gothic, and this seems to have helped to explain the choice of style, as you could therefore rework it a bit and we get a harmonious pod. But at the same time, there's no reluctance on Hawksmoor's part to do Gothic, and he's obviously rather thrilled by it. He had a kind of strong imaginative engagement with Gothic. And so to the rack of camera, well, this really concludes this great age of building in terms of new projects. Hawksmoor had designed a camera. It's a library. He had designed preliminary versions for a domed building, a round building, or this building with a round upper story, which would have stood up against and joined onto the Bodleian. After his death, the commission passed to Gibbs, and we have something standing free. Anyway, there it is. I mean, Gibbs in Cambridge, so that's this brings back to Cambridge, as he did the Gibbs building at King's and it's St. Charles. So perhaps Gibbs brings that one. But this is the last great work of that period. So when we move on, then the next big name that comes up is James Wyatt, who had a bit of a near miss in Cambridge because he was going to be the architect of Downing, but that never happened. Then years passed, and of course, in the end, it was Wilkins. But in Oxford, you've got rather a lot of work. This is one of the better known classical ones, because he's also doing neo-Gothic, Oriel's Library, 1780s, and by now we have a more Grecian treatment of the order, the ionic capitals there. What you don't really get in Oxford is large-scale Greek revival on the Downing model. It just doesn't happen. Big commissions don't come on at the right time, or if they do, then a version of Gothic in Egypt, Tudor, or you want to call it, is used instead. Just to show another Wyatt building inside the observatory. He comes late to the project, which was started by Henry Keane, but this interior is Wyatt era. So we have to go forward. If you're looking for Greek, then the Ashmolean is the best example of this. Those parallel in great many ways to Fitzwilliam. I think with Oxford's Cockerell being the most sophisticated and accomplished classical architect of that time, certainly extremely well resolved and rather fascinating building with its sources. The Ionic order from the Temple of Bassi, a building in Greece, which Cockerell knew and had explored, but fused with all sorts of other motifs, something Vignola, but with an overall effect, as Pevsner said. The impression is French, and Cockerell was Haut Courant concerning Parisian architecture. So a building really in the mainstream of European classicism, as you might say, certainly as sophisticated as you might find in France or Germany or Italy at that time. So classicism then sort of disappears for a while, but don't think that that means that there is nothing interesting or exciting going on. So these are two superb, magnificent, and highly sophisticated and endlessly rewarding buildings of the period, which are proudly neo-Gothic. We're going to jump over those to T.G. Jackson. So when classicism returns for the university and the colleges, it comes back in associative and picturesque and eclectic ways. These are Jackson had a connection with colleges. He was an Oxford man. He won the competition for the examination schools. Again, great expression of classicism by the university for itself, tying in with the movement to reform, to the use of public written examinations, and the introduction of new disciplines. All of the things being fought over in Oxford and Cambridge. So he's associated with the reformers, with those who would open up the university to non-Anglicans, and so on and so on. And this is the winning party, and he gets lots and lots of work. The staircase at Hertford, which is which we partly reconstructed, this deriving from the Chateau of Blois, the famous spiral staircase there. But mostly his sources are Elizabethan or Jacobean English, but recombined in other ways. So he never repeats himself really. And Cambridge equivalent, well, there isn't one, and there's Fawcett, who is the local university connected architect, but he's a rather cautious and rather plodding architect, alas, by comparison. And when the university was building on the Downing site, then there was the building just north of here. Jackson gets brought in. Jackson comes in and does masses and masses of Jackson. Maybe not his best work, but certainly eventful and lively stuff. The sciences and the buildings next to it. And as classicism goes on, well, the Oxford story tends to reflect the national story. There is a reconnection carrying on from Jackson's kind of thing with native traditions. So this is Lady Margaret Hall, one of the women's colleges, Reginald Blomfield. Several faces here, but you'll see the looking back to Wren or the Wren period, the use of brick, sort of friendly Englishness, the sash windows. But innovating too, this is strictly late 17th century form with these curious buttresses rather than. You know, find comfortable buildings among colleges and town halls and schools, so on as square. And as into the interwar period, well, a sort of stripped versions of classicism or of collegiate or manorial or traditional. This is Blutchen's one of his own Deep building in Oxford, and here he's really looking at some Cotswoldy things, but mixing it up a bit. If you want to find a really interesting classical design, well, this was, I thought, actually one of the best. I think in some ways that, well, this Herbert Baker at the Rhodes House, but I wanted to cheer for Thomas Henry Hughes. Regent's Park College, this is a Baptist college. It doesn't play by the Oxford collegiate rules, that's the hall. But it's also serves as a lecture theatre with a public entrance from the street. You know, it's not shackled to the traditional expectations of an Oxford college. It's not residential. But Hughes is an interesting and I think rather neglected figure. He was, well, he'd early on been a pupil at various Kite, very interesting, rewarding architect in a sort of free classical style. He spent a brief time working in Glasgow for J.J. Burnett, which is a great Beaux-Arts figure. He married the niece of Burnett, who was also an architect. Then he became first tutor and then head of the architecture department at Glasgow School of Art. And still didn't kind of pin down why he was getting so much work in Oxford. But he did get a lot. He built an extension to the Taylorian, Sheldonian complex and did it very well. Here, well, the sources, I think, probably sort of back to the sort of 1820-ish French or sort of neo-Breck style. That's an unusual style. But these details have a sort of early 19th century French character. It's not a complete plot with the at the back of the photographer sort of adapted older houses, but it is a fully achieved, classical symmetrical composition. Pevsner didn't take to this at all, I'm afraid. He didn't tune into it. He said it is in a dead classical revival. But Pevsner had his prejudices, and one of them was that you've got to stay up to date. And by the late 30s, you should really be doing modern, or at least be a bit more modern than this. So I didn't keep that phrase. Normally, we try to keep or adapt everything as far as possible. So another jump forward to post-war, and just at the moment when Oxford and Cambridge too were going modernist and moving away from the sort of watered down traditional architecture. Queen's College bucks the trend. There we go. This is the provost lodging that's the head of the college. It's one of the best known works really by Wren, an architect who essentially are sort of carrying on in the neo-Georgian tradition, but with exceptional refinement and thoughtfulness and physical quality. Pevsner called this an exorcist, to say, purist and neo-Georgian. Well, really, no, not at all. I mean, this is looking back at 16th century. Simon Cayley is the name that tends to come up with this rather bold treatment of the rustication, but then the contrast with it. Again, it's sort of boldness and just the sheer plainness of what's going on above the public face of the building. So keeping it quiet and private, as this is a public street. Sides very plain, straightforward, rather kind of neutral, neo-Georgian-ish in sections. But nonetheless, a building, a memorable building. Here has got more work, but not at Queen's. He got a great deal of work as Lady Margaret Hall. I don't know why it's not showing. Yes, Lady Margaret Hall, there were. This was completing an existing quad. This is sort of Blomfield era here. Here, Pevsner seems to have kind of tuned into it rather better. He says first, it's almost like a freak of nature. So this shows his commitment to modernism, writing around sort of 1969, 70. But he notes this is an architecture of great conviction and also the degree of playfulness involved. That there is, for instance, these lunette windows at the top where the library is. You can't quite see the lower part, but there is a sort of rather plain, rather Hawksmoorian arcade where the people sort of growing up. And without stressing it, you know, that Pevsner didn't mention it, but it's kind of noticing that this very flat, very planar treatment, which is itself interesting, it has a character and force. It's not simply a neutral or a economical treatment. The next slide to appear. And the college has continued in the classic with a swerve into modernism in the 70s, but it has come back to classicism more recently with some work by John Simpson. Yeah. That's what I'm trying to get to. Okay. Yes. Who I think was picked up very successfully on this on the Wren treatment, this very flat unmodulated wall, and then we here using a different version of an arcade, not bothering with symmetry, and Simpson, if you know his work, is sort of quite prepared to chuck that particular classical principle out. But sort of getting away with it, I think. These sunbursty openings, perhaps evoking the kind of classicism neo-Wren that Bromfield was doing, but perhaps also reminding one of Lutyens, something like a good space, possibly here. Anyway, you know, it's good, I think, and I wouldn't say a classical revivalist at heart, but I know one recognizes good things when one sees them. He's come to do more recently. This is called the quadrangle, but it's not really much more than a new forecourt. There are new lodges here. There's a shop, 3 columns rather than 4, and some referencing to the late Roman, Roman classical buildings in the pediment. And this is Iris behind. So I think a sort of creative dialogue with Wren and Iris' work, and altogether making a very successful composition. Well, the colleges, of course, as in Cambridge, give the opportunity for a great diversity of patronage, obviously Downing case in point. But the university tends not to be quite so plural. However, there is one university commission at Oxford, which is my final slide, which is fully and unashamedly classical. This was the, well, now no longer the Sackler Library, but the Art and Archaeology and Classics Faculty Library, built round the back and to one side of the Ashmolean, and a difficult site with not, this is its chief sort of public face, and Robert Adam, his firm, therefore sort of pushed the main volume into a big drum here at the back, and then you enter through this little mini drum. And as a composition, I think it works very well. When you get inside the library, alas, you have the sense of the budget really stretching. I mean, the early preliminary designs for this, which were part of a fantastically grand treatment for rebuilding the back parts of the Ashmolean as well, and having a kind of classical covered street, you know, right the way through from here to St Giles on the eastern side. Well, shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. So it's rather utilitarian and sort of rather gloomy and pretty Caesarean, to my mind, in terms of this book stack in the middle, and you sit around the edge, but the finishes are economical at best, and so on. So if you're a fierce modernist, you say, well, of course, you know, you've spent all your money on the embellishments, and you've got no money left over to make the actual experience of using the building any good. And I think that charge that carries some weight. But anyway, I shall end there.